Welcome to the Orthodontic Pearls podcast, where we share tips and tricks to better your clinic, business, and life. Today, we have our honored guest, the Digital Orthodontist, Dr. Kyle Fagala, as we discuss practice growth, digital marketing strategies, and how to get the most out of your life. And now your hosts of the podcast, Drs. Chris Teeters, Brian Anderson, and Andy Sarpotdar.
Welcome back to the Orthodontic Pearls podcast. I'm your host, Andy Sarpotdar, and here with me today we have, as always, Dr. Brian Anderson, Dr. Chris Teeters, and our special guest, Dr. Kyle Fagala.
Fagala, yeah, just right here. Just push it.
Who is
push
this
it
guy?
out.
Fagala? Yeah. It sounds made up.
Heard of him.
I've never
Andy,
heard of this guy
we speak
before.
almost
Anyway.
every day.
All right. You called me out. So, of course, we all know Dr. Kyle Fagala. He's basically in every part of the industry at this point. He runs the Neon Canvas marketing agency, co-founder of the Neon Canvas marketing agency.
Yeah, don't run it, but yeah, fair enough.
All right, being modest, but yeah, we got...
No, I'm not the CEO. That's Alex, but I appreciate it.
Not the CEO. We're going to edit out that entire part at this point.
No, you shouldn't. This is great.
Okay.
No edits. You promised me no edits, Andy.
I did promise you
I'm
no
not the
edits,
CEO.
but
I'm a
I
big
lie a
part
lot,
of it. But yeah, go ahead.
All right, so not the CEO of Neon Canvas, but he is the co-founder of Neon Canvas. Knows a ton about marketing, involved in pretty much every aspect of the profession, from lecturing to consulting to he has his own podcast, Facebook group. The list literally goes on and on. So we're obviously honored to have Dr. Kyle with us today. We're going to jump right in with our first segment, which we talk about a post from our Facebook group, the Orthodontic Pearls group. And this one got a lot of attention. This was a post by Dr. Glenn Dubroc. And for those of you who don't know him, he is a retired orthodontist, practiced in Louisiana for several years, but retired early because he was able to invest and save enough money to do so. And Glenn's model is an interesting one. So he is a very low overhead and self-described low volume practice. I believe, don't quote me on this, but at some point he had like 2 employees and was doing most of the adjustments himself. But that allowed him to keep his overhead below 30% or around 30% and make a very good living. So Glenn does some lectures. He's been at the AAO, and most recently he was at San Antonio lecturing to the residents out there. And he made a little post about this. Someone thanked him for his visit. And, there were a ton of comments here, a ton of feedback, most of it positive, about this model that doesn't quite get a lot of attention in our profession. But I wanted to take a few minutes and discuss this idea of a very low overhead, low volume practice and compare that to some of the practices we hear more about these days, those big multi-location, multi-million-dollar practices. And, let's talk a little bit about the good, the bad, the ugly, and evaluate both sides of this equation. So I'd like to start with you, Kyle, if that's okay. Now, Kyle, you obviously have one of the larger practices. We won't get into specific numbers here, but you have 2 locations. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I don't mind to share like numbers and whatever. I don't know that I have one of the largest practices or whatever. I think we'll produce $4.5 million at 2 locations, for what that's worth. To me, that feels like, at least from what I surmise, like maybe a little bit above average, but there's much, much larger practices. But whatever that's worth, I try to be open about those things because, I don't know, I think it's like helpful to know kind of what people are doing. But I really don't know what it is that everyone's doing. Like, that's not like a huge focus, whatever that's worth. And I think, Glenn, I always say Dubroc. I don't know.
Pretty sure that's the pronunciation.
He's kind of, banged on this drum for a while. And to be fair, I appreciate it because I really don't like the idea that there's only one way to do something. I'm sort of a devil's advocate on some level whenever it's, sort of a thought experiment on what do you want from your career? Like, what is success? And I guess for me, like, this conversation should always begin with, what sort of practice do you want? And to whatever degree you're able, what do you think will make you happy or fulfilled? What does success look like to you? Because I can guarantee you it is not necessarily seeing 150 patients a day. It's not necessarily having a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, $16 million conglomerate, multiple location organization. And, so there's been a lot of, in my career in 12 years, kind of Ben Burris is one of the first sort of people to amplify a message of, kind of multiple locations and the group Pro Ortho that was a part of that. And that from that became Smile Doctors. And so all those kind of people, movers and shakers, were a part of conversations around these things. So I got to listen to all these different perspectives. At the end of all that, Ben was kind of pushing like a single location, large practice model, which, maybe you work 3 days a week. And I think that kind of, to me, is the goal. Like, if you could distill it down to one thing, it's, can you make, let's just call it $3 million at a 50% margin, one location working 3 days a week? I don't know that you could do much better than that. You're taking home $1.5 million. And I mean, at the end of the day, what you take home is what matters. And so to Glenn's larger point, if you have a margin of 30% or less, you don't have to make a whole lot to take home $600,000-$700,000, So I like all that. And I'm kind of talking in circles, but it is to say, I don't know that there's any one road to Rome or whatever you want to say. So for me, I've had 3 locations at one point. I have 2 now. 2 is the max for me. 3 was way too many. And if I could go back and do it all over again, man, if I could just have one location, see patients 3 days a week, that would be great for me. But I also have an associate, and that's a whole nother complicating factor. And so I want y'all to unpack some of these things. Maybe we can come back around to some of that.
Yeah, I mean, so what I'm hearing is, I think this is largely accepted. I don't think it's controversial to say that it's what you take home, not what you make, that is the most important number, so to speak. But of course, there's other factors involved too. How complicated is your life? Is it worth making an extra, say, $400,000, $200,000 a year if you have to constantly manage an associate, if you have, a team that's constantly bugging you and you're just stressed out all the time, even if you're only seeing patients 3 days a week. So, there's certainly lifestyle to factor into. Kyle, you mentioned it comes down to what kind of practice do you want? And you have to take the whole picture, not just the money. Chris, now you're a single location, a pretty, a fairly medium to big size, I think. Tell us about your thoughts on this. I do know you recently cut down. You were working 5 days a week with 2 doctors in your office, and now you're 1 doctor with 3 days a week. And I don't think that you're really missing anything. It seems like you're much happier. So what are your thoughts on these different types of practices?
Well, I think we all have a choice to make. It's either more money or less stress. And I think that one's easier than the other. And I guess depending on where you're practicing, that could be different. But for me, my goal was to enjoy my life, regardless of a certain number. And so I think, another $1 million or so to open another location wasn't a big driver for me. As much as I love to work, I just like to work on different things. I like to spend 3 days in the clinic. I like to spend 2 days working on mother of pearls and relapse, and then spend the rest of the time with my family. And that's very fulfilling to me. So for me, my goal was a single location, 3 day a week, and try to keep it at 3.5 million. And if I can sustain that, I'll be happy there.
I mean, this all comes down to a balance. Let's say that on 3 days a week in a single location, you're making significantly less. I mean, is there a threshold number that you would have to hit in order to make 3 days a week work? I mean, there's no secret that there's diminishing returns on everything, including our income. I've thought I would do pretty much anything for the first $70,000, like literally anything. I'd work 7 days a week to make that because that's my survival money. Once I'm up around, $400,000, $500,000, I'm probably looking more to take another day off a week than make another 100,000 on top of that, because it doesn't really move the needle in terms of lifestyle. So I will pose that question. Would your answer be a little bit different if your practice wasn't making that kind of money?
I think if it was even down as much as 700, 800,000, I'd still stick to the 3 days. I felt a lot happier going from 4 to 3, immensely happier. But it would be different, I think, if I were
good for you, bro.
Maybe 500, 600,000. I really want to get to that next level. I think at that point, I might work harder to get there and then scale back. So I'd be willing to kind of pay it forward, like do 4 days for a while until I can get back to 3. But not if I'd have to drop quite a bit to do that at this point.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that the message here is that as part of defining what kind of practice you want, finances do have to factor into that. And yeah, depending on where you're at in your career, you might be able to take some time off, or you might have to really hustle to get there. It's not going to be the same answer for everyone, I don't think.
Right.
Brian, now you're in a multi-location. Now you actually own pediatric office, and your situation admittedly is always confusing to me. I think one of them is partially owned with an OSO. You have one in Utah.
Not even just his practice situation, just in general. Brian is an international man of mystery. Yeah,
that he is.
But look at Brian, that jaw. Look at that jaw.
That's mostly beard. Don't let him fool you.
That's right. It's just. Yeah,
if we dried and weighed that jaw, it'd be off the scales.
That's right. Tony Robbins, right?
Is that a Tony Robbins quote?
No, that's a Tony Robbins.
Very
jaw.
Inspirational. Oh, gotcha. I gotcha.
Yeah, that's what he says right before you walk across the hot coals. If we dried that jaw and weighed it. Sorry, go ahead.
All right, Brian. So yeah, tell us your situation. Just clarify that for us. And, what are your thoughts on this? How do you define your goals? What kind of practice you want?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that in some ways, we're lucky to even be having this conversation, right? It means that we've done well enough that we can kind of philosophize and discuss it. And I think, for some people, they're just getting started, or they're wanting a change, or they're wanting to, their lives and practice lives are changing. And so for some people, you don't really have the luxury of like choosing, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
sometimes you just have to just take what you can get. Mm-hmm. So I want to acknowledge that not everybody's in this situation, but for those of you that are going to be opening a practice or thinking of buying a practice, even if that's not right away, hopefully there'll be something in this discussion that can be helpful later, when trying to define what kind of practice you want to have. So I just want to say that. So in terms of my situation, I'm in a partnership here in Salt Lake. We have 2 locations here in Salt Lake. We do have an associate doctor, so there are 3 of us. That's part of an OSO. Then I own a pediatric dental practice that is not affiliated with my orthodontic practice. There's an associate pediatric dentist that works and sees the patients there. That's part of the DSO, I suppose, not an OSO, part of the DSO. And I'm with another group that's like a specialty group, and that's doing orthodontics. So it's kind of complex, but that's just kind of how I just sort of stumbled into this, and it worked, and it met my financial goals. To me, I feel like there have been a lot of great opportunities with what I've done. Now, do I want to do that forever? No, I want to simplify, honestly. Mm-hmm. And so what I would say is, speaking of your goals, I think not only is it important to establish what your financial goals are, but to try to really know yourself. Like, well, what do I want in terms of socialization? Do I want to see a bunch of patients every day? Like, am I extrovert? Does that bring me energy? Or am I more introvert? Would I rather see fewer patients a day? Because if you go against your own sort of biology, your own energy, prioritizing something, like, for example, if you prioritize success as in, I want to have a gigantic practice, the biggest practice with the most patients per day, blah, 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 right? And if you don't understand that you're more introverted and you're going to be miserable doing that, then you might achieve your financial goal. I got this big practice, maybe an ego trip on some level, and then find, but gosh, I am miserable doing this. I am miserable doing this. And so I think to some degree, we all run into that at some point, right? Like when I saw Glenn's post, I thought about it. I thought, you know what? Who knows what the future holds for me? But if I were to do my own practice, at some point in the future, I would probably want to have a smaller practice, more of a boutique practice with higher fees and fewer employees.
Yeah.
Because the bigger it gets, I'll admit, it can be stressful. A lot of moving parts, a lot of people to manage. There can be drama, a lot of different personalities you're trying to get to buy into your systems and your culture and all these types of things. And then, of course, for example, in my practices, I've tried to be high touch in terms of attention to detail, time with the patient, time with the parent, educating, et cetera. And yet it's also a fairly high volume practice. And those things kind of don't work together that well without, feeling burned out. So I'm feeling some burnout, at this point in my career because I can't give up like the quality. That's something that in terms of professional integrity,
you got to get over that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right, man.
No, of course, I'm totally kidding.
Easy, bro.
Totally kidding. But I do want to just interject like a side note on that is when my first job out of residency was with corporate. Everyone does that. And I remember the first day I walk in and, it's kind of a show and like just a mess. And the dentist there is obviously just like this burned out dentist. He was only a few years older than me, but had already basically given up on, felt like life.
Mailed it in.
And yeah, pretty much. And, I'm like looking at these treatment plans and the patients, and I'm kind of shocked at how poorly managed these cases are. But then again, I don't really know that much. I'm fresh out of school. And I go to the dentist there a few years ahead of me and just ask, what was this guy doing? Like, how do I I'm trying to fit in. I'm trying not to make waves, but also like, holy crap, help me out. And he said, look, dude, the key to getting through this job is you got to stop caring.
Oh,
And that he just point blank said that to me. And I won't tell you which corporation that was, but I mean,
man.
I don't think that that's an uncommon mentality. It was that moment that I just realized I've got to get out of here before I become him, before I get to the point where I don't care. And that was a huge motivating force for me to start up a practice,
I think that's the big idea. And I think that's one thing I don't like about these conversations about practice size is this assumption that a large scale, busy practice, successful practice doesn't care, does crap work, whatever. Like, I think those like sort of absolutist approaches to these conversations bother me.
Yes.
Because I have to assume that there is excellent work being done in your busy practice, your small practice, your whatever. There's also high profitability in your small practice, your large practice. And I think it is all vanity at the end of the day if you're not like doing what fills your cup on a personal, spiritual, emotional level. But also like it's a business. So like what actually is profitable. So a busy practice at an 80%, 90% overhead, which exists, is idiotic. And you need to delete and change and reconfigure. And you mentioned younger orthodontists. And if I'm watching this as a resident or a young orthodontist, this all sounds silly for me to say, well, it's 4.5 million, but I know there's bigger practices. Like that sounds ridiculous. Again, to whatever degree you can philosophically decide, at the beginning of the race, what sort of race am I trying to run here? I don't have to win. I just want to finish that race, or I want to run the race fairly. I want to run the race in such a way that I feel good about it at the end. That is sort of the goal that you're setting out to accomplish. And that may change as you go, of course, but certainly opening 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 locations because you went to this in-office course where that's what they did and they were happy and successful with it, but your personality type might not fit that. I think that's something you really have to like ask these, what I call presuppositional questions, these foundational questions of who am I? What is going to make me happy? What will fulfill my life? What are my greater purposes? What decisions we make in terms of our practices, those should be subservient or secondary to the bigger questions of life. And at the point at which they aren't, things start to kind of fall apart. I will say, it's sorry to be so talkative, but another Glenn Krieger, seemingly a little different than Glenn Dubroc, but who knows? He did a post in September in Orthopreneurs, and I wrote it down in advance of this interview, but he talked about 4 main reasons people enter the field of orthodontics. And I think this is another, which is sort of in line, Andy, with our conversations on personality type that you've done on my podcast and that we all love. And, but he talked about 4 categories: entrepreneur, socializer, scientist, and technician. And it is almost sort of like a disc profile of sorts where you kind of occupy maybe 2 of these spots, or maybe under stress, you become a different thing, or whatever. But I think in reality, this is pretty accurate in the sense that, success for some people is entrepreneurial. It is some sort of new business venture whereby it's profitable and they're, innovating, and that's what drives them. Or maybe a socializer, like they really just do orthodontics because they enjoy the interactions. Maybe in some level they see it as sort of like a Mother Teresa, like helping the public type thing, like a missionary type thing. A scientist, someone who loves the details of the science of orthodontics, or maybe the technician who just loves kind of the rote bending of wires and creation of smiles. And at the end of the day, I don't know what I am. I'm probably an entrepreneur come technician, some mix of those two. But I think that should also dictate exactly what it is that you're shooting for, because success will look different to those different types of people. So maybe there's something there for y'all to chat through.
We want to thank Large Practice Sales for sponsoring this podcast. Chip Fitchner is the co-founder of Large Practice Sales, the largest advisor to orthodontists seeking to monetize a part of their life's work through a partnership with an invisible dental support organization, or IDSO. Today, there are dozens of qualified IDSOs partnered with growing orthodontic practices across the U.S. at record values. Large Practice Sales has completed over $1 billion of IDSO partnerships in the last 24 months, with over $150 million for doctors in their 30s. For more information, you can log on to www.largepracticesales.com or reach out to Chip Fitchner via email at chip@largepracticesales.com.
I think you're dead on with that. And it kind of comes back to what we were talking about before, is that this discussion basically centers, when we distill this down, I've heard it come down to, it's about your profit, not your revenue, right? And that's still just one aspect of what this is. It's trying to simplify your preferences down to one metric. And it usually comes down to money because that's just easy to measure, But
money is like the worst metric you could possibly choose. Like
exactly, it's not
maybe
it's a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. And I think that things like this, it is, but it's easy to measure, and as humans, we do have a bias towards numbers. And when we really get to know ourselves, we can make more accurate goals in line with what we want. Now, I consider this from a slightly different perspective. We have to consider lifestyle both in and out of the practice as well. So I've always thought, and my biggest pushback against the small practice is that knowing myself, I'm very bored by tedium. Orthodontics actually suits me because I have a short attention span. I kind of like the fact that I've spent, a minute at each chair and I'm just bouncing around. I'm basically making quick decisions, talking with patients, but I don't have to spend 30 minutes actually implementing what I know to be right. That part was rough for me in residency. Like I just have a hard time sitting in the chair that long. So for me, a model that requires me to be doing my own adjustments is just never going to work. I'm going to burn out so fast. And that does require that you have a large enough practice to effectively delegate. Now, there's an upper limit on that as well. I will tell you, I'm facing some burnout personally right now. I've talked to you guys individually about this. But yeah, managing all these different personalities and constantly being in the middle of what your patients want and what your employees want. And a lot of times those are in direct conflict with each other. I'll give you a great example. Our hours. Our patients want us to be open till 7. Our employees want us to close at 3 so they can get home with their kids. And then as the doctor, you're just caught right in the middle and you're trying to make both sides work. That will wear on you. And that happens in so many aspects of our careers. So there's an upper limit on that too. I do think that the more people you have, the more that's going to be a problem. But I also think that there's a scenario in which you can learn to even delegate that part. Again, there's not a right or wrong answer here, but I think we need to look at this holistically and not just dial in on a simple number like revenue.
A couple of things I want to say about that.
Yeah.
So first of all, know thyself, right? Mm-hmm. So we're talking about knowing what our preferences are. And some of that comes with experience. So some of that you're not going to know until you have some more experience and you realize, oh gosh, now that I've done this, I realize that I don't really like this. I want to do something else. You learn more about yourself. So that comes with time. So you're not going to get it quote unquote right the first time or right away probably. But the more time you can spend to really be introspective and self-aware, the better, I would say. Mm-hmm. And then number 2, I think there's a lot to be said about principled living. In other words, what are your defining principles? Okay. And then how can you achieve those? And how do you need to pivot and modify plans so that you can stay committed to this principle? So if we're talking about integrity in terms of treatment integrity with patients, that you're rendering, the best care that you can, right? And then let's say you are doing that. Let's just have a scenario. You start up your practice. You're committed to great treatment, and you happen to be, reasonably likable and nice and friendly and charismatic and whatever. Okay, so you've got like a decent thing going. So you start building this practice, and you're committed to great treatment. So excellent, treatment integrity, and then you start growing, and your practice gets bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where you feel like, okay, I absolutely am always committed to treatment integrity. That's something that I found in my practice on. That's something that I need that in my life for me to be fulfilled. So then what do? Well, you have choices then. You can either reduce your volume, or you can train more effectively, or you can incorporate new technologies, but your principle never changed. So you have to stay committed to that, because if you sacrifice the principle at the expense of volume, for example, so let's say you start out with this principle of treatment integrity, you start to get busier and busier, and then you start cutting corners. You stop really explaining things well in the exams. You cut your exams out entirely. Maybe I'm not saying that's wrong. If it works for someone, do it.
For what it's worth, like, can I call that like a North Star? Like, what are you moving towards? Because you need to be making progress towards that at all times. And I think maybe that's, to me, the answer to this whole conversation is you have to decide what that is. Like, what is going to guide you,
and don't violate it. Like,
don't violate
it. Yeah,
know your why.
Yeah, and it is a why-based, kind of conversation and a there's different ways of coming about this because we've all tried to kind of get at what this is, but it's sort of like the classic city slickers, what's the meaning of life? And Curly puts up the one finger and it's
the one finger.
Your finger? He's like, no, it's it's that one thing. And so what is the one thing that should drive you? That almost felt like one of those little cheesy, like 15-second clips, but then I kind of messed it up by talking about it. But this would be like the intro. And then you hear that like bombastic music that, it's the Pearls Podcast, #1 in Nebraska.
That's right. But no, I think that know thyself, North Star. I think these are all important things. And there's no right or wrong answer, but just look at the whole thing holistically and stay true to yourself.
I think to your point, Brian, trusting the process is important. It's okay to maybe follow this direction for a while and realize that's not you or it's not in alignment with your goals, and then you pivot. So many people think success is just a straight line, but as we know, it's definitely more of a journey. And it's okay to say, okay, I just got out of residency. I'm buried in debt. I really am focused on profitability right now, and have that be a pretty strong consuming endeavor for you. And then once you get to a point where that's no longer a big factor or weight on your life, I think it's important that we reevaluate that North Star and we pivot and we say, okay, now I've achieved this. I don't have to keep trying to get the biggest practice possible. What else is there? And I think so many of us get caught in that same mindset of residency or a new grad that we don't break away from that.
Like you always want to stay close enough to the edge, right? Where you're not totally fulfilled and where you've reached a level of fulfillment that you're like, okay, now I have to move on to be challenged. Because otherwise you get bored in whatever you're doing. You achieve this, you achieve that, you get bored. So you always want to kind of stay on the edge and know when it's ready to make a change, right? Like when what you're doing is no longer serving that North Star. Okay, this is now at odds. So now I have to make a change. And I think it makes decision-making so much easier, for me at least. And I've found that I don't have to think so much about like, well, what's the right decision here? If you're conscious, you're paying attention, you're being thoughtful, the right decision is whatever you choose. Because whatever happens when you live that way will be for your learning. And you'll be able to incorporate that, even if it was I don't think it's on the wrong decision, but let's say you make a decision to go corporate. You realize, oh gosh, this is not for me. You just effectively learned that you don't want to go corporate. So you go back and you do your own thing, right? And I think it's foolish in some ways to say, well,
I'm sorry, Brian, I disagree with that. There are wrong decisions. It's like, oh man, I stole this car and now I know it's a bad idea.
No. I'm not saying that.
No, I'm kidding around.
When two decisions seem like they have equal merit or relatively equal merit and you're deciding one or the other, then I've started to look at it more in a way of, okay, be conscious, don't be driven by fear, look at this, and then be willing to have a little bit of faith in your thought process and then step out and do that thing.
Yeah, you're right. The point is you can always make a change.
You can always pivot, right?
Yeah, you can always pivot, and that's true.
But go wholeheartedly in.
At the same time, I think you see more commonly people stuck in situations that are the result of their own creation, and they're helpless to change it. And it's like, well, you created this, you can uncreate it, you can change it. And so for whatever that's worth,
Good discussion, guys. I really appreciate it. I'd love to move on
See you later.
to our next topic. On that note, I do want to discuss Kyle a little bit. So a lot of people know Kyle. We're not going to go into all the stuff that you can just listen to in a lecture, but I want to get to know Kyle a little bit more. So Kyle mentioned that I'm really big into these personalities. We've all taken it before.
Yeah.
Brian, Chris, you guys are both those ENFPs. That was the campaigner, just very enthusiastic. I describe that as like, a
Don't
puppy
shake your
dog.
head, Kyle. You're married to one.
Very, they're kind of the worst, But you change one letter in that ENFP, you make it an ENTP, and that's probably the pinnacle of evolution. Just a very, also
smart ass.
Basically like an ENFP, except we actually, we use our heads sometimes and think. But then you have Kyle, who
my wife is an ENFP, and when she's mad at me, she's an ENTP. So it's perfect. Yes, I know both sides of that coin.
I don't think it works that way, but at any rate, moving on from that. So Kyle is what we call an INTJ. So that's an architect. So he's the introvert in the group today. And, an architect, they're going to be strategic. They like to research a lot. They're very rational. And actually, one of my favorite stories about Kyle and his personality has to do with his wife, Anna, and how they met originally. And Kyle, if you're comfortable, would you like to share that story with us?
Well, I'm not comfortable sharing that, so no. I'm just kidding. Yeah,
I'll share it if you don't want to. I can.
Yeah, okay. I didn't know that had become like a thing, but coming back,
it's going to become a thing now. I'm making it a thing.
Going back to college as a junior, I had been faced with this option of literally becoming a college minister or pastor, what some churches would call, or going back to college to pursue, eventual dental training. And I sat on that for a couple of days. And as Brian was kind of alluding to, I made a choice. I went with the direction that made the most sense to me. And it was the wrong decision, Brian. I'm just kidding. No, I went back to school. And as crazy as it might sound, and it won't sound so crazy to Andy, who went to BYU, and Brian, who, like those of us who grew up in these kind of more fundamental Christian backgrounds, I wanted to be married. And so I was going back to college with this idea of like, I need to find my wife, And so I did make a list. I'm a very goal-oriented, like task-driven person. And I made a list of all the, I know, right? Of all the characteristics that I wanted in a potential wife. And of all the people that I knew who were out there, I did list a few people out of who I was going to try to like date or whatever. And Anna, it turns out, was number 2 on the list.
I love that.
I
love that you're so open about it. Like,
and in fairness to Anna, she should have been number 1. She's not number 2.
Right. Anna's great. Anna's great.
The number 1 who was on the list, who I'll never name, she was someone that I knew a little bit better. And so I sort of like, made an attempt at the number 1. It didn't really pan out, and the number 2 did work out. So thank God I didn't have to make it down to number 5 or 6. I mean, really. Yeah. And it was just a marked drop off. So, but yeah, that is me. And at the point at which you're 18, 19, 20, you have no idea who you are and what ways you're different. Right. I remember going on a study abroad program and wanting to always plan the trips. And I was just happened to be among friends who, in the context of traveling and planning, we're very different. And so actually we exited that trip, that whole summer, not friends, because we just approached things so differently. And I didn't get it at the time. I wish I had had someone to kind of walk alongside me and say, this is why this bothers you, or this is why you are the way that you are. But I've always been this way. I mean, this is me. It's imprinted on my, genetic code or my character, as it were. I like to do stuff by myself and plan things out in my mind and blueprint them before I actually do them. And it's just who I am.
Kai, I'd like to ask a follow-up question to that because, it surprised me when I learned that you were an introvert. You would never guess it based on your presence in the orthodontic community. I'm sure in your own community as well. What is it like to be such a public figure, but yet be an introvert who, in theory, gets drained by all that interaction? And what draws you? Like, what drives you to be in the public eye?
Well, in fairness, I'm not like massively introverted. I'm not like 99%. I do feel sometimes like as I get older, I do become more introverted. And I don't know if that's actually that I'm changing or if I'm just becoming more aware of it or if I'm just becoming less disciplined or if maybe I'm just too maxed out. And I do think in a sort of state of burnout or sort of emptiness, as you might say it, I think you do revert to sort of who you are at base or at foundation. And so I don't know. That's a to be determined later. But, in my lunch break, I like retreat to my room, turn off the lights and just sit there, like it is definitely who I am. And it was who I was as a kid. And was I born that way? Did I develop it because of circumstances in my youth? I'm not sure. But at this stage, I'm grateful for whatever it is that I'm party to in the orthodontic community. And in fairness, like social media is an interesting thing. And you've seen this and we've all seen this, that people who are the most involved in the social media kind of context aren't necessarily that way when you meet them eye to eye. I remember meeting someone who's really involved in the, orthodontic social media world and they couldn't make eye contact with me. And I was like, this is kind of weird. So I'm not that. I can be an effective extrovert for a period of time, but at the end of those weekends, I'm just totally drained. And if I'm being honest, meetings where I have the option to kind of go down and see people or hang out, I'd probably rather just stay in my room.
Yeah.
And I always think of Grant Collins. He's the same way. Glenn Krieger is the same way.
Both of those were shocking to me. I mean, again, some of the most prominent people in the field, and it turns out they're introverts. So I mean, speaking of some of your accomplishments, I mean, so we found this out. Kyle and I were talking about a different thing. I guess it was your Golden Molar Awards or something like that. But did you win that award, Kyle?
Well, okay. So the Golden Molar, for what it's worth, it was very expensive. I don't even remember exactly. Several $1,000s.
Too much to like give away to an actual winner.
Oh, it's like 40 or 50 pounds too. And we gave it, the only person that actually like kind of received it was the living legend award. It was Dr. Andrews, who's since passed away, and a great man. And it was awesome. Like he spoke and he spoke, and it was great. But if you're at the ceremony, and I handed him that thing, I was like, man, he's going to drop this thing. But no, he held it. So it's very heavy, but there's no like sensible way to make a bunch of those. I mean, it costs like $100,000. And then we tried to make smaller ones, but it's like very hard to get a 3-dimensional thing that's not going to look like crap. So we're still actually working on, for the second award ceremony, like, what are we going to give people? So anyway.
Well, I will make a pitch. If you, if we happen to win the best podcast award, we do have a couple of very brawny guys out here who could definitely. I was going to
say Brian could
easily handle 40 pounds.
I'm going to curl that, man.
Really quickly, you're all three very svelte gentlemen, but between Chris and Brian, who can lift more?
Oh, that would definitely be Brian. But who can run faster?
What about between Chris
Definitely
and Andy?
Chris.
Lift more or run faster?
No, lift more. No one cares about how fast you can run. Andy and Chris, who can lift more? Chris, right?
It depends on the lift, I think. Chris is going to beat me in the arms. I beat Chris in the chest. We don't do a lot of squat. Chris and I like to skip no, I'm just kidding. But we've never competed on squat. I've never done squats with you. Right, exactly.
We need to have a workout off at the next Pearls meeting. You need to have like a,
let's do it.
It's like a, whatever. So like Arnold Schwarzenegger does these like bodybuilding things or whatever. But
I'm happy to do that. But one request is that we drug test first, because I don't want to go up against Brian.
You know what? I have a requirement that there's no cardio involved. That there's no HIIT. There's no HIIT involved. We're not doing.
If Brian beats me, there is going to be a big asterisk next to his name. That's what I want.
Actually, this was the podcast intro right here. This is the 15 seconds.
There we go.
We're going to drug test Brian.
I'm coming in
this
clean,
episode
baby.
of Orthodontic Pearls podcast.
I'm coming
probably
in
wondered why
clean.
we're all gathered here today, Brian. That cup in front of you, if you could just pee into that for me. Yeah,
How do you
there's
look
a funnel
like a
right
Grecian
next
god?
to it.
That's just not.
I don't want to assume anything, but. Bringing this back to our original question. So, if you search for best orthodontic speakers on ChatGPT, Kyle gets number 2 apparently. But then if you look at the source, it's actually when Kyle searches, and that was going to be. They took my punchline.
Well, number 2
already.
seems to work out for Kyle, being married to number 2.
There we go. Second best. But of course that reference is the Orthodontic Pearls page where he spoke, and Neon Canvas actually made that page and wrote that segment. So, take that for what it's worth. But, author, speaker, co-founder of Neon Canvas, relapse drummer, successful practice in Tennessee. There's really few corners of our profession where you aren't a leader, Kyle. And I want to hear a little bit about what drives you and how do you manage all of those different projects?
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. And thanks for giving me this honor of ChatGPT saying I'm a great speaker, but then, revealing why it was. So it was a page that my company wrote. Anyway, I think ChatGPT actually can look beyond that and can kind of surmise. Anyway, yeah, great question. I think, the one thing that's true of me is that no matter what I'm involved in, I want it to be the best that it can absolutely be. And I expect excellence from myself and from everyone involved. I can't say that I do that 100% of the time, but that would be my driving force ultimately. I think, personally, I've kind of I haven't been officially diagnosed, but watching my daughter go through some of the process, I have ADHD, and I hate when people kind of tag themselves as this or that, or
we all do
this micro trauma or what, whatever. And I'm not trying to be overly critical or whatever, but I absolutely have every sign of that. And it's like when you start following one of these pages, and it's like people with horoscopes or whatever. It's not a horoscope, but you're sort of like, yeah, that's me. Oh my gosh, that's me. I just didn't know, so I'm an INTJ and I'm ADHD, and that is what I am. And that kind of explains the way that my mind works. And that is to say that my mind is always racing, and it's only happy if and when I'm doing a million things at one time. And I get to just dive deep and as deep as possible into so many different areas of interest and hobbies simultaneously. And that's just kind of how I'm made. And so it's why am I involved in so many things? That's what keeps me sane. And that's how I work. And that was how I was in high school. I was always involved in a million different things. I did everything I possibly could. And some of that was I went to a very small private school and I could play every sport. I could do yearbook and newspaper. I could play in a band.
Those aren't sports, right? Yearbook and newspaper?
Yes. No, I played the sports, the basketball, the soccer, the track, cross country, all that stuff. I did all that. And I was fairly good at some of that and good at soccer and whatever. Like, but in a private school context, like now my kids go to big public schools and you can't do everything. But in that context, like I was able to be in plays and in these like traveling like drama groups and like anything I wanted to do. I started a chess club to get out of class, like whatever it was, I could do it. And it was perfect for me because I have so many different interests. And a lot of that stuff kind of went on the back burner as I went into dental school and to college first, because you couldn't scratch those itches, you know? But then you get out and you're an entrepreneur and you're kind of like a free agent. You can do whatever you want with your time. And it's like Neon Canvas has been such a blessing because it is a platform for all these like creative projects. And I get to work with like truly creative people who their life's work is graphic design or writing or whatever. Like, and I can collaborate with them, which I love collaboration. And they all know that I'm always going to be the most picky and particular person who's always going to push for it to be A+++. I mean, launching like the Orthodontic Awards website yesterday, I work with Trenton. He's like our head designer. He knows how crazy I am. Like, you know, I want everything to be exactly, you know, a certain way. And that's just kind of how I'm driven. I think beyond that, it is the people in my life that I'm surrounded with that know that about me, that are willing to put up with that. And so, namely my wife, Anna, who's willing to put up with that and work around that. Now my family, as they grow older and they know that about me, my teams at Saddle Creek, my team at Neon Canvas, and then my friends that kind of know that about me. I mean, Chris and Brian are kind of nodding their heads. They put up with me and how I am with Relapse. And I think it makes for a great marriage for what it's worth. They have the same personality type as my wife. And I think there is a sort of yin and yang to someone like me who wants to dream up all these crazy things. But like Chris is the one that like just does it. Like he makes it happen. You know, I can't really succeed on a high level without people like that to kind of do the things I'm not great at. So
I think that chemistry is so important. And again, I hate to keep banging this drum about personalities, but that's like one of my working theories here is that each personality needs to be buffered or supported by the right chemistry with other personality types in order to thrive. I have a similar thing with my wife. I'm similarly chaotic to Brian and Chris here. With that ENXP, we call it, energy. My wife, she is a lot more focused, a lot more methodical, traditional. So whereas, our dynamic is I'm coming up with these ideas and new things that I always want to try. I'm like always buying crap on Amazon. She says I have an electronics graveyard. We literally have a closet just for the stuff that I buy and then realize, that didn't really work the way I thought it would. Not as big as she says it is, but you get the point. And, I think that those who we surround ourselves with definitely support those aspects of us. I know, Chris, you've got a kind of a similar personality there. You're always trying to drive forward and engage in a lot of things, go deep dive.
Yeah.
And of course, you guys, I think this is a great segue into Relapse because you are, of course, band members there. I would really love to hear about that dynamic a little bit more. And then just, kind of tell us about the story of Relapse. How did you guys come to be? Where are we going from here? So, Chris, why don't I lead off with you? If you want to just tell us a little bit about that.
I'd say working with Kyle has been really a dream because he is an architect and he's very picky. And I am too, even though I'm all over the place and a little ADHD too, but he can come up with something, we'll go back and forth, and he'll just flat out say exactly how he feels, like, no, that sucks, or do this. And I go, you know what, you're right. And then I go and I do it. Instead of, we don't spend a lot of time going back and forth, going like, I'm right, you're right. It's like, okay, Kyle, you've thought this out more than me. I trust you on this, and we take off with it, and it always works. And I can see why he's successful in so many areas. So that's been really great. In terms of the formation of Relapse, when we did our first conference at MOPC 2018, we had no money and we needed entertainment. And we just had a venue that was gifted to us by Embrace. And we said, hey, you know what? We got together some of our friends we've never actually played before, but we're going to go ahead and do this thing. And, when we went up there, we played for like 200 people, expecting it to be kind of a karaoke night. And I had we all experienced our first, you may have had this, Kyle, but I never had an encore in my life. I played in many, many bands, but never had an encore. And we left and we played 7 songs and we had nothing else to play. So we came back and we did the first song again for those that came in late. And it was like a year later, we're headlining the AAO for
I literally don't remember that.
People.
That's amazing. I
the
don't
encore was
that.
a repeat of the first song.
It was a repeat of the first song. We just went back and did it again.
How lame is that, huh?
You couldn't pull hot cross buns out of your pocket without a rehearsal or anything?
Buns. What was the name of that venue?
Mozambique. It was on the beach.
Mozambique, yeah.
Yeah, that was the first one.
That was a great night. I remember that night. Where were you that night, Brian?
I was there, man.
You were there.
Where were you when the world stopped turning?
Yeah. Yeah, good deal. All right, so you
Alan
guys, you get your start in that first MOPC meeting. Tell us, where did you go from there? I mean, at this point, you guys have played House of Blues. You've played in stadiums and cruise ships.
Well, not a stadium. We've played arenas, stadiums. That's the final frontier, I think.
So
we're going to play.
I was today years old when I realized there was a difference between those two, but let an INTJ point that out for me.
Yeah. Well, there is a Greek base in the word arena and stadium. I'll allow you to look that etymological foundation up later. But
I probably won't do that, but
yeah, it's just a question of size. And I think, does it have a ceiling or not, or a roof or not? But yeah, we've played Wintrust Arena, which was big. I mean, that's where the WNBA team plays. Like, it was supposed to be 6,500 people. I don't know if that many showed up, but it's been awesome. I mean, it's someone who's like at some level played music and tried to play in concerts, and I have played encores before, but as like a 14-year-old all the way up till now, and I've been active. Relapse is this like really just magical experience where we get to play these huge shows, and it's fun, and I like everyone in the band. And it may not surprise you if you follow music at all, but most bands don't get along, don't like each other. And in fact, the more that I do Relapse, the more I like the people in the group, and that's just truly like a blessing. And I don't mean to sound like condescending, but I don't know if everyone in the group necessarily gets that. It's just a sort of unique thing, and we all respect and like each other, and we're different. And I think for me, that's kind of the funniest thing. We're talking personality types, so may as well keep going. Is that I'm the odd duck in the group, the black sheep. I mean, Ak and Doug are ESFP entertainers, just in the moment, there for the fun time people. I believe Brian, Chris, and Jackie alike are ENFPs. Jackie might be a
Jackie's ENFJ.
Commander. Okay. Is that a commander? What is that?
No, that one is the
protagonist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is Charlie, my oldest, but same difference, not anything good. Right. I'm kidding. No, but I'm an INTJ. So I'm kidding. So
if there's not a T in your acronym, then you're basically just
you're dead worthless to me. Yeah. And so you'd kind of asked in the pre-interview, like, what are some of your favorite memories? And I mean, there's so many. And maybe even talking about this seems like goofy to people who are like listening to this. And I don't even know if you have like a context for it, but it means that 3 or 4 times a year we get together and we play music together in front of people, and people have a great time, and it's unique and it's fun. And who else is doing this in the orthodontic space? Well, no one. I think for me, the funny thing is that they have such different personality types from me that I almost feel like I'm on an island in some ways, and like all their kids will be around, and there's all this like craziness and fuss, and I'm just so stressed out because things are not going as according to my mentally, developed plan or blueprint for how this should go. And I can be a little short and impatient in the lead up to these things. And so I don't enjoy the lead up, but I always enjoy the implementation of the thing. And ultimately, I love these people so much that I don't care that they don't see things the same way. And I think probably the converse is true as well.
We want to thank Large Practice Sales for sponsoring this podcast. Chip Fitchner is the co-founder of Large Practice Sales, the largest advisor to orthodontists seeking to monetize a part of their life's work through a partnership with an invisible dental support organization, or IDSO. Today, there are dozens of qualified IDSOs partnered with growing orthodontic practices across the U.S. at record values. Large Practice Sales has completed over $1 billion of IDSO partnerships in the last 24 months, with over $150 million for doctors in their 30s. For more information, you can log on to www.largepracticesales.com or reach out to Chip Fitchner via email at chip@largepracticesales.com.
What do you guys think about that as two of the more chaotic ones in the group, especially you, Brian? Let's hear what you have to say about that.
Brian was on stage with a cast and his foot elevated at the last show.
Which, by the way, how did that happen?
Trampolining accident.
You stole my thunder. I was going to set him up. Yes. Something cool. Was that motocross? Was that skydiving accident?
Sorry.
Let's hear. I think you were drinking like a pink Alani Nu as that happened, right, Brian?
So Andy said that's like the most ENFP thing that you could do to have a bad break.
I was trying to make everyone around me enjoy the trampoline, and it just sort of happened. Yeah, for sure.
But I told Andy,
he was he was showing off
while I was doing motocross and skydiving at the same time.
Skydiving
and
into a
making out
trampoline,
with my
also
girlfriend.
ENFP.
All the same thing. They're probably just the same thing.
Yeah.
No, but
I was like, it sounds like he's describing a Jason Statham movie.
More or less.
Oh, but yeah. So I the last show I had surgery on Tuesday morning, and this show was on Friday night, and it was painful. But to Kyle's point, and it is something that I do appreciate. That it's like when you have a friend group that is special, like is just different. There's a vibe about it. There's like a culture about it. There's just a feeling about it, like, okay, what we have this is good, right? And I feel the same way about this podcast, by the way. I really do. I feel like, okay, there's something good here. So I've always felt that about Relapse, that we have this unique blend of people. And to your point, Kyle, the older I get, the more I realize how important it is to actually have people who are different than you. You mentioned, yourself, kind of what your proclivities are, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. And so you surround yourself with people. And I would say a lot of times this is totally unintentional, because we attract into our lives what we're deficient in a lot of ways. Right. And because there's this inherent kind of pull toward balance, right, in life in general. So it's not surprising that, yeah, we are different, but I think it's those differences that actually make the group great, that I just really actually enjoy doing it with everybody. And I enjoy all the people that do it, and I respect them all. And as much as anything, it's about the relationships. And Andy, I mean, you've been a bite straight boy, dude. You've been on some of the relapse things. And I mean, it's a fun thing that I think because we're having fun and we're enjoying it, hopefully that translates. I think it does.
Yeah.
Because going back to the chemistry thing, and when you know what you have, when you have something, you have the it factor, generally that is felt by others, and that generally leads to growth.
Yes.
A bigger following, like whether it's your practice, whether it's, whatever you're doing, if you have that energy, like the flow, as like educational psychologists would say, if you're in that state of flow, things are generally going to go well. And so I feel that way about Relapse. Great people in it, and it's just a really fun opportunity. And it's totally niche and super weird and unique how it even happened. And so I think we all recognize that. Like, it's totally a luck thing. I mean, so often we ascribe our success to our talents or this or that or the other. I mean, a lot of this is just sheer luck. And we are so lucky to be in this weird niche where we get to play all these shows for sizable crowds, and we're not playing in like a bar on a weekend, right? And it's just really, it's a cool thing.
Well, they say that success is when preparation meets opportunity, or something to that effect. Kyle's going to correct me on that, I'm sure, but that's about what it amounts to. Yeah. So, I mean, you can prepare your whole life. I mean, all of us have done that. In order to become orthodontic practice owners, we had to go through at least 11 years of school to get there, as well as the informal training of understanding how to even start up or purchase a practice, and then learning how to influence and lead other people. A lot of preparation. And for most of the people, the odds are that's going to work out, but it always does take that spark of luck. It takes that first guy who's willing to sell you his practice, or it takes that right location to open up where you want to live. And it also takes you being able to recognize that as the opportunity and to run with it no matter what. So you're absolutely right. I think that's one of my big themes, is that we do tend to discount the influence of luck, or another way of saying that is probability in our lives. We're not we always want to look for cause and effect. Sometimes it's not as clear cut as that. In fact, oftentimes it's a mix of both intention and what happens to you, how you deal with that. So
I do want to say one thing about that. I've found that with this type of mindset, when I recognize luck or God's hand, or however you want to say it, like something that's beyond your control, right? You've done what you can do, and then other things were necessary to fall into place for a certain outcome that was desirable. It's easier to have gratitude in that space than thinking that it's all because of you. You can't be grateful when it's something you did. You just think, well, I did it. I did it. I had to do it. You can be grateful when you can recognize things that are beyond your control that are to your benefit. And so I personally think that's I just like that way of life better. And I think certainly, applying that to Relapse is true. I think certainly applying that to like my practice and stuff. But going back to Relapse, Kyle's like the de facto leader. And of course, just with how prepared he is, he's very organized. It's like we just recognize like, yeah, he's the guy to do this. Like he's naturally suited to do this. And so it's easy to follow, right? And that's one of the things that makes it unique. And Kyle, you mentioned that most bands don't get along. I think because it's like, well, yeah, dude, you're clearly better at this than we are in terms of planning, organizing, executing. And then Chris just knows, dude, I don't know how you are so productive. You're so amazingly productive that your mind can switch from one thing to the next so quickly. And you do it with such grace. What I mean, like you do it with a genuine smile. Like it's not a forced smile. Like if I get too overloaded, I might have to force a smile or not smile at all, right? But with you, like you can just tell it's for real, man. It's genuine. I freaking love that about you, and I just appreciate the both of you, Kyle and Chris, for your talents and the things that you really add to the band that make it great. And of course, the others that aren't here too. Each person adds something unique that makes it pretty special.
Awesome stuff, guys. Well, thanks for that, Brian. Yeah, I mean, you guys are killing it with Relapse. I'm really looking forward to watching you continue to grow. Your next show is going to be, is it MOPC? Is that next year that you're going to be performing again? I'm sure
that's the one confirmed show we have is MOPC next year,
Okay.
Cape Canaveral, October 10th through 12th. We'll be playing under a space rocket. It's going to be pretty epic.
And I got to say, that was a tough one to like get into. Like we had to negotiate hardcore with like the meeting on owners and stuff.
Yeah.
It was a tough one. Like we were lucky that we got it, but we secured it and
it's going to be amazing. I can't wait for that one. It's going to be just so cool. And I'm sure you guys will be performing, in between as well. So I'll catch as many of those shows as possible. And, hopefully bring the Bite Straight Boys back. I think that that's unanimously everyone's favorite segment. I like to take a lot of the credit for that. But anyway, moving on, no discussion with Kyle is going to be complete without discussing marketing. So I have a couple of questions here for you, Kyle. So the first thing is, in general, what are some of the most common pitfalls or shortcomings that you see in your average orthodontic practice today?
Yeah. I have started with this 12 years ago and I stick with it. It's this idea of start with why. And actually Simon Sinek, the AAO, brought him on to do this really cool program that I think launched 5-6 weeks ago. And I was able to film one of the modules and talk to him and ask him some questions, which was pretty cool. And basically his, big idea is that great organizations, great brands, their story starts with why. Why do we do what we do? Chick-fil-A, why are we a fast food restaurant? Disney, why are we a theme park? Harley Davidson, why do we do motorcycles? Tesla, why are we a car company? They're not actually a car company, they're a software company, but Apple, why are we a computer company? Well, we're more than that. So these companies have adherents and disciples, you could say, that love these companies because they always lead and they always start with their why. And they're not a how and what company, which is the alternative. And I think that, to say it frankly, a lot of orthodontists have no understanding of marketing and storytelling, really. And what we go to is what we know, which is what we do and how we do it. And that's what we want to promote to people. But the reality is from a marketing perspective, a storytelling perspective, that story is not very compelling. Okay. How we do what we do is interesting. Sort of like I remember that show, like How It's Made, where they'd show you how a broom is made. But how interesting is it? Like 5-6 minutes, that's how a broom's made. Okay. I never need to know anything else about that. If you're trying to find a compelling story, it is more central or more to the core of humanity that is going to be of lasting and long-term interest to people. And so why Saddle Creek Orthodontics exists, or why I exist as a thought leader or whatever, it's got to be a little bit deeper, a little bit more interesting, a little bit more intriguing. And so the stories that you tell, both via your website or through the medium of social media or in your community or in your office, they need to be more compelling. And I would just challenge people to come up with bigger ideas, be more creative, be more unique, and be more willing to tell those stories, because if what you do exists in a vacuum, no one will ever know about it. I think another shortcoming is that, to the degree that a lot of us are effectively ADHD, we like to get one plate spinning and think that this is going to be the thing, or this is going to be the vehicle, or this is the new shiny object that's going to make my practice what I've always wanted it to be. We get that spinning to the detriment of the other spinning plates that were spinning previously. And so we kind of dive into this one thing, think it's going to be our, savior. and we forget the other stuff. And I think marketing is never just one thing. It's always dozens and dozens and dozens of things. And the challenge is not necessarily the idea, it is the implementation. And then I think additionally, it is the continuance of those things. And so it's, can you come up with all these different ideas, none of which are your own? You're taking all these ideas from other people.
Yeah.
Can you then implement them, which is a challenge of its own? And then I think even more, can you keep them continuing on and keep them fed effectively? That is a very philosophical way maybe of looking at it, but I think those are the big shortcomings. I think maybe even like a little additional shortcoming is that I think a lot of orthodontists have been successful at everything in their lives. And so they think that means that they're good at everything or that they're experts at everything. And in fact, they probably aren't great experts at business or marketing. And I'm not trying to pretend that I am, but I saw a post the other day where an orthodontist was talking about what should be done with Google advertising or something as if they were an expert, and they, to be frank, have no clue. And so I think there's a certain healthy level of doubt that should exist in all of us. And yeah, I'm not saying that you should just be taken or just trust without any confirmation what a marketing company might tell you. That is a bad idea.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I don't think we should equate success from an academic perspective with success necessarily in storytelling or marketing or business or entrepreneurialism. Did that make any sense? I hope so.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I want to ask a little bit, that was a pretty broad philosophical answer.
It was.
With both of those responses, as far as telling your story, I've thought about this a lot myself. You recommended me a while the book, Building a Story Brand, and I thought that was very fascinating. Hard to translate that into actual practice when it comes to an orthodontic office. In that book, it'll tell you about defining your hero as the person that you're speaking to and not yourself. And you're more the guide, showing them the way. And, all these, it goes into great detail there. When the rubber hits the road, so to speak, what does that look like in an orthodontic practice? Maybe you could just give us some examples of what a good storytelling would look like versus a bad storytelling, perhaps using some examples from your own office or Neon Canvas versus, a generic kind of post that doesn't work out so well.
Yeah, wow, that's a big question. So story brand is a concept from Donald Miller, who was kind of originally like a Christian author. He did Blue Like Jazz, which was like a big book, kind of, I don't know, early 2000s, let's say. I've seen him speak, and he's kind of pivoted into this story brand direction. I don't think he's necessarily like coming from a church place any longer, for what that's worth. But yeah, his big idea is that the way that you brand yourself through story should be in the context of elevating the hero of the story, which I think we usually think of that being ourselves, the orthodontist. I'm the hero of the story, but in fact, it is the patient. And so I think to a certain degree, what you're trying, and I think there's different ways of coming about this, but it is your main platform for your story is going to be your website. Let's just say, I think there is this idea of starting with why from a storytelling perspective, that you're trying to elevate the certain stories that make you different, that are unique to you. And so in the sense that at Saddle Creek Orthodontics, we have, a stuffed sloth that other people don't have, that if you contribute towards, it helps us to do free treatment for people in foster care, things like that. Like that's a thing that an orthodontist does not have to do. It does not have anything to do with how or what we do as orthodontists in terms of straightening teeth. But it is a unique story that is about why we do what we do as an organization, that we try to go beyond to try to help our community, to help the patients that come into our contact, and that is kind of a part of that. And so that story should infuse that, as opposed to just a website that has typodonts with braces and aligners and things like that, that looks more functional or focused on, the details, or in some sense, the broad strokes of orthodontia, which a pediatric dentist or a general dentist could do.
I've noticed that if we pay attention to our engagement on social media, those kinds of posts tend to get the least engagement. The ones that
of course they do, because it's only so
educational. Yeah, I mean, we can church it up with something like I've seen one of the best posts I see, or it gets the most engagement, are these guys who just use typodonts like bite into different kinds of food.
Well, so that's a different thing. But on what level does that actually build your story? On what level is that actually servicing anything local to your community? It's not. That is a whole nother like ASMR, like sensory thing that it only occupies space in the context of social media, and it only furthers that. And so there are some accounts in orthodontics that are big because they bite into candy bars and stuff with typodonts. But to me, that is white noise and nonsense. And I hate to say that as strongly as that, but that is not helping further one's practice. What helps further one's practice from a storytelling perspective is what, sells. Like what are the most popular television shows? What are the, when you check out at the grocery store, what's there at the checkout? Well, yeah, you got candy bars and junk and stuff, but you've also got like human interest magazines. I'm watching back through the show Friends. I've never watched it before. And it's such a cultural mainstay that I was like, I got to watch it. And there are things I don't love about it, but ultimately it's a show about 6 people who spend time together. I mean, it's just pure base common denominator, human interest. Like that is in some sense a combination of story brand and starting with why. It is at a human level. What is it that is universal to all of us, that is compelling to all of us? And that's not going to be a metal bracket or a self-ligating bracket or a custom designed, 3-dimensional bracket that uses computer technology to better straighten teeth more efficiently, or like whatever. Like that's only so interesting to people. So it is the stories that exist in your practice that you choose to elevate that help to support your bigger vision for the world. And that sounds silly, but like, okay, you think Apple is silly because like Steve Jobs gets up and talks about some big idea, or Elon Musk talks about some big idea? Like, no, it's actually like pretty inspirational and motivational, and it gets people to want to follow this person. Yeah. And if it's done in good faith, and if it's backed up by quality treatment and by the real deal, as it were, then people will buy into it increasingly so, and they'll become raving fans and they'll want to tell other people about it. And so again, that lives in the tangential and it lives in the philosophical, but I mean, you can drill that down into specific examples, but I would just say it as simple as this. Like if you are in Colorado in a mountain town, your brand should look kind of like that and feel like that and lean into that. And your story should fit that kind of archetypal audience that you want to, bring into your practice. And it should feel real. People have great BS meters. It shouldn't feel fake. You shouldn't be doing dance moves on TikTok if that's not natural to you. And it should be reflective in a certain sense. It should be documenting the things that are happening inside of our practices, all of which on average are pretty great. It's just a matter of selecting and focusing in on the things that will make you seem like a real person who cares, who has compassion, that's doing great work, let's say. Doesn't mean that you can't talk about orthodontics or the straightening of teeth. It's pretty cool. It just should be that that's not all you talk about. And the fact that I happen to be a drummer that sometimes lectures, that has Dippin' Dots and Stuffed Sloth, and that does, gives away money to this organization that's local, like all those things that as a collective make you a compelling option when it comes to, I need to straighten my kids' teeth, where do I want to go? And at the end of the day, we're all like slaves in a sense, or we're all imprisoned by this demographic limitation that we all have geographically and in terms of the people that surround us that have the money to even afford what we do. So like nothing is ever apples to apples. And so sometimes people are successful not because of their marketing, but in spite of their limitations and their shortcomings. And so I know, Andy, you're in Arizona and it's one of the hardest markets. And so you could be a 10 out of 10 on like 16 different things as it pertains marketing and still not
I like to think I am.
The fruits of that. Well, you're not, but you think you are. No. So again, I'm a little off the rails here and kind of on to one thing after next, and I'm chasing squirrels here. But I think you start to get that it's a very, very deep conversation. There's no one size fits all thing.
But it comes back to that same thing we talked about earlier, that North Star. And I think that if everything, I tell my team, and we're not always successful with this, but when we tried to really revamp our social media, I gave them the instruction that, I just started with our core values, and I said, we got 4 core values. And if you guys think that every post that we make should be a demonstration of at least one or more of those core values, then that's going to get you about where you want to be. Now, are we always successful with that? No. I mean, a lot of times it ends up being, the type of biting into candy. And then, much to my chagrin, that ends up getting
social media is
the
good.
Most engagement. Well, we do try our best, and I'm proud of what we're putting out there. But like I said, it's hard to really, to get that completely dialed in, but I think you do a good enough job, and then the market takes care of itself.
Let me just say this too, like for what it's worth, as it pertains to social media, a lot of this conversation kind of comes back to that. And I think like, to be fair, marketing, your best focus is on your website and trying to get as many people to that website as possible, which begins with search engine optimized placement on Google. Then it follows with Google ads, and then it follows with Facebook ads. And then somewhere below that is social media. Social media does not act in the direct intent of, I need braces for my kid. It is sort of like swirling around in the consciousness of people in your market, for whatever that's worth. but it is effective. And let's just be honest, it's something that did not exist 15 years ago and is a huge advantage and an amazing lever, as it were, for practices, especially new and young practices. So use it or don't, but if you're going to use it to amplify a message that is going to compel someone to want to come and get to know you or to feel like they have a relationship with you, because those things all help people want to buy from you more or to help get services from you more. And so it is not the end all be all of getting patients into your practice, but it does help.
Hey, one thing I want to add about that on this topic that I think is important, and it's already been said or alluded to, something that I think is really important is to, tell the truth about what you are, not try to guess what the people want to hear, right?
Mm-hmm.
So be authentic. So, and Kyle mentioned something to, along to that. I think people do want something that's real. Mm-hmm. And people want connection in the day and age that we live. Interestingly, we're pretty disconnected. And so anything that speaks to our humanity, like you said, Kyle, I think is going to be almost an instantly sort of like connecting thing. Someone's going to perk up like, oh, here's something real. I'm hearing something real right now. It's not this facade. It's not a cover up. It's not me manipulating you and saying what I think you want to hear, but said without any passion, without anything behind it. Kyle said people have good BS filters. I think that's true. I find that if you can just be authentic, be true to who you are, and be real, and that's flaws and all, right? But you are who you are. I think that tends to sell well if you can do that with a sense of purpose. And so I think, whether it's social media marketing or relationship marketing or whatever, if you're presenting your humanity to the world and you're, trying to live by those values, then I think that's always going to be compelling because you're going to be establishing connection. And that's what people really, really want. People want to be connected in the end, and you cannot connect to something that's not actually there. So if it's not sincere, don't do it. If it's not really you, don't pretend that it's you, because you can't connect that way. So people want connection, and you can only connect if you're actually showing up being you.
I think that, that authenticity is very important. I describe it as you want to be yourself, but you also want to be the best version of yourself. I don't want to take a TikTok of me sitting on the can. It's like, yeah, that's authentic, but no one wants to watch that. Maybe some people do, but anyway, that's a completely different topic. Kyle, you mentioned that really the king is still Google. Google optimization, website you mentioned is the anchor point, and of course that all kind of connects to Google. There are some changes going through Google right now. What sort of do you see Google maintaining its relevance into the future? How can we prepare for what's coming in terms of AI? Is that going to affect traditional Google search? As someone who owns or at least partially owns a marketing agency, what can people do to prepare for these changes? And what do you predict is going to be king in the future?
Yeah, great questions. The quick thing I would say is I don't think anything's going to change in the foreseeable future. You think about the most popular websites on the internet, Google and YouTube are two of the top 3 or 4, no matter how you slice it. And so there is no way that they're going to give up that sort of effective familiarity in the market. It's not like they're going to go down without fighting. And AI already has started to become a part of Google. And when you search, there will be the AI generated answers effectively. And I think the long-term change will be from search shifting from finding information to getting information. Like the time it takes to ask a question and get an answer will be shortened. But that information still needs to live somewhere, and it still needs to be pulled from somewhere, because AI is a language learning model and it has to have something to learn from. And so when it comes to commerce, there still needs to be a storefront. And in the context of a digital village or neighborhood, you want to say, your website is your storefront. For the foreseeable future, there is going to have to be this same game of creating a website that tells your story and that allows someone to engage with you and to effectively buy from you or to offer a buying signal to you. Like, that is not going to change overnight. I don't see ChatGPT replacing that. I don't see just pure AI replacing that. There is such a thing for when you actually want something more than just a quick answer that you might get from AI. You need a little more information. You need to be able to trust it implicitly. you do want to go to a source. And AI is still also pulling from that source. And so you have to have that out there, and it needs to be optimized for that. And so it doesn't change maybe the game, as it were. It changes a little bit the rules of the game. So to me, it's kind of like the NFL. Like now the kickoff is a little bit different. And if you do an onside kick, you've got to tell people, you can't hit the quarterback right in the head anymore. Like there's some changes, but it's still football. The stats are still the same. The idea is still the same. Who wins the game is still those that kick the most field goals or score the most touchdowns. And so I think, in fact, I hate to, toot my own horn or whatever, but I think Neon Canvas and marketing agencies like us are still as positioned as well as we've ever been. And it will still be the same game. Increasingly, people will be going online for answers to questions. And it turns out that you cannot send aligners through the mail and do orthodontics. So you still need to go into a brick and mortar to have orthodontic treatment. So if there's anything we should all be excited about is that AI cannot replace what we do.
Yes.
And I think that's the beautiful thing. And so in that same sense, marketing those services, it will be enhanced and changed a little bit by AI for sure. And Google will be changed by AI a little bit, but it's never going to be done away with completely, at least not in my lifetime.
We want to thank Large Practice Sales for sponsoring this podcast. Chip Fitchner is the co-founder of Large Practice Sales, the largest advisor to orthodontists seeking to monetize a part of their life's work through a partnership with an invisible dental support organization, or IDSO. Today, there are dozens of qualified IDSOs partnered with growing orthodontic practices across the U.S. at record values. Large Practice Sales has completed over $1 billion of IDSO partnerships in the last 24 months, with over $150 million for doctors in their 30s. For more information, you can log on to www.largepracticesales.com or reach out to Chip Fitchner via email at chip@largepracticesales.com.
Well, you guys obviously know what you're doing. I mean, if you, again, ChatGPT putting you as the number 2 speaker in orthodontics. That's, I trust
so many
that.
sleepless nights to ensure that. I was actually surprised by that. I was looking up for help with nominations, which I did not nominate myself, even though ChatGPT would have put me there. I didn't feel good about that. But I was just looking for ideas, which is like really awesome. I was like, what are some new products in orthodontics? And I'm telling you, like, it spits stuff out. It's amazing. And I was like, wait, that's a dental product, not an orthodontic product. Oh, I'm so sorry. I won't do that again.
Yeah, I do have to throw out there, like, that would solve your issue of the 40-pound golden molar award. Like, if you just get to take that home yourself every year, but I don't know.
If I just won all the awards, if I just nominated myself and ensured that I won all the votes. Yeah. That's not why I do this.
You would concede it. I mean, as long as it's a fair vote, but anyway, we'll move on from that.
I clearly keep the trophy. It's like right here. So I guess I already am.
That is kind of true. Whoever wins, Kyle gets to keep the trophy. So I guess it's his contest. He can run it how he wants. I think rigged is what the kids are calling that nowadays. But anyway, again, moving on from that.
Riz?
I said rigged. I would never say Riz. Oh my gosh! Do not put those words in my mouth.
That's skibbity.
Well, you mentioned ChatGPT, skibbity.
Yeah,
I heard that. Man.
I have a daughter. She translates all this for me. It's
That's
wild.
Awesome. Well, with ChatGPT, we're always talking about this. You've kind of gotten me into the AI space a little bit, and it's it's kind of incredible what this can do nowadays.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm opening up my ChatGPT just so I can look through the history. Yesterday alone, I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different conversations. And some of those conversations had a lot more than others. And I mean, sometimes it's just to service conversations that I'm having. Like I have, clarifying an idiom, pushing the needle. It was written out in something, and I just wanted to. That didn't sound right. No, it's actually moving the needle or pushing the envelope, and so they kind of mixed those idioms. So I clarified that. Or I was looking for Ortho Awards nominee ideas, or I was using it to alphabetize different nomination lists. I mean, something that I could have done manually, but it's way quicker to do it this way.
That's cool.
Yeah. Or I'm looking up things, just trivial things like, what famous people have died from the common cold, because I had a friend who had the common cold and we're just like talking about it. Or I'm writing an email, or I'm coming up with captions, or I'm going to a concert, Dave Matthews and Tim Reynolds concert in January, and I want to know what sort of set might they play and what about the opening acts, and then I'll make a playlist from that and go ahead and copy that. And like, I use it for like all sorts of stuff. But again, maybe that's just like how my mind works. And maybe all that to people are like, well, I would never use it for that. I don't know. I was trying to come up with like a better scheduled like lunch plan for myself and breakfast plan because I'm not great about it.
Dude, that actually work?
Oh, of course it does. And I'm on like a
Really?
weight loss medication, so I don't feel the need to eat lunch. But because I don't eat lunch, I'm like a little cranky, and it's not ideal to not be eating lunch. And so I was like, okay, I want a healthy lunch, and here are some of the things that I like, and I need a grocery shopping list that will satisfy these requirements. And within 10 seconds, I had like a list, and then I sent it to, God bless her, the nanny that works in our house and kind of acts as a personal assistant. And she went to the grocery store and got it. Like, I don't know. Those are tasks that would have taken like 30 minutes. And now it takes me like literally 20 seconds. And then I copy and pasted it into a Google Doc and I print it off. And then I, digitally print it as a PDF and I send that over to Cheryl and she's got it. Like, I love that. Like, I think
that's awesome.
To your question earlier about like, how do I do so much? Some of it's like using digital tools like that. Like, I mean, I save myself hours and hours and hours. And if I'm writing something, even like a comment on like Facebook or whatever, which is a system that I use maybe a little bit more than the average person, like I'll write something, maybe I'll like copy and paste and say like, make this sound better, like, and it can do that. So there's just so many uses, especially for someone who's in storytelling or in marketing and in kind of has a platform. I use it for all kinds of stuff. So even this podcast, even some of these questions, like that was like, some of this was like helped by
I knew
AI.
it. Well, that's okay. I wrote all these questions.
Not in
with
its
ChatGPT
entirety,
too.
but I mean, I don't know. So it sort of changes. I think of it, at base, it is a personal assistant that you can ask anything of.
Yeah.
And why not?
Well, what about accuracy? I mean, do you find that it's actually accurate? I mean, like there was that whole controversy right. I mean, well, that's the problem, right? Like famously there was that they asked it to make a picture. I think this was Bing search. This was something else. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm talking about. And it comes back and it's all like, it's so overtly like wrong and biased.
Some of that's
do you find
that? Yeah.
I mean, like, how much can you trust these answers that it's spitting back to you? I think you mentioned one time you use it to do some, research to rebut a comment on Facebook or something, and it gave you something that was actually like objectively false.
It made up some research papers that didn't exist or had the wrong years or whatever. And so I don't think that's any different. Well, it is different. Let's say it's little different effectively from the way research has ever been done. I mean, what is truly factual, anything, even a source material that's written by the hand of a man or a woman is like on some level only so accurate and only so factual and only so pristine, as it were. And that is a huge like pillar for me is factualism, like things being true and upholding that. And I think things can be objective and should be, and that bothers me a lot. For whatever that's worth. I want things to be true and honest and upfront and authentic. And so, ChatGPT will sometimes get things wrong, and I'll tell it, I'll be like, you just made that up. Why did you do that? Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. So
it really responds like that.
That's
awesome.
It's funny. Well, my AI does, because I treat it like Dobby the house elf, because I'm sort of half Slytherin, half Gryffindor personality type. But
awesome.
And so when the machines become self-aware, I'm going to be in big trouble. But no, I think that you do train it though by telling it like, don't do that, don't make those assumptions. Or when you put in the input, it kind of wants to give a lazy answer and an assumed answer and a paraphrased or a qualitative answer. And you need to tell it like, no, I want you to seek these reference sources for when you're coming up with your answer. And you can tell like, only take papers from the AJODO or the Angle Orthodontist. Like you can do that and it will do it. Wow. And it might try to like,
that's cool.
skirt that a little bit. But you can always say like, hey, give me a link for these papers that you referenced right now. And it will do it. And you can follow those links. And so you do need to do that extra step. But I think that's true of everything. It's like any video you watch online that has some sort of like, it's Jordan Peterson says this, or this guy, Joe Rogan's interviewing this guy on this thing or whatever. You do need to do the little extra work of like, is that true? And sometimes in the comments you'll find that. But sometimes in the comments it's people lying. Like, we've always had to do this. We've always had to like consider multiple sources to come upon truth to whatever degree we think we're getting close to it.
Yeah.
And so I think AI just gets us there a little bit quicker. And yes, those systems will improve with time. But human logic and basically a North Star commitment to truth and objectivity, that is something you have to hold to. Like AI is not going to be able to do that for you.
I love that. I think it's interesting as we've been in the information age for a couple decades now, but as this is evolving into whatever's to come, this new level of access to information to me is demonstrating just how poorly equipped we are to handle objectivity or to even perceive of it. One thing that is basically common knowledge now is that we used to have a lot more consensus in our society. We used to watch 3 networks and you had to tune into one of those. And it was, it gives you almost the illusion of consensus when really what it is just a control of the narrative. And now there's just so many multiple narratives. I mean, you've got podcasts, you got YouTube videos, you've got different news sources that are trying to compete with all of this and having to evolve and, produce more inflammatory information as a result. And one of the problems I see is that you could search for any outcome that you're looking for and find multiple sources to back it up. And I'm not convinced that that's going to be solved with something like ChatGPT because, like you mentioned, it still needs to have that North Star plugged in. And sometimes, like I mentioned with that, I think it was Bing search, but those images that it was producing, which were so objectively false, it was clearly steered by the programmers and their North Star, their priorities, but it resulted in just complete garbage that ended up having to be shut down completely. So it's going to be an interesting future with all of this. And I can't say I'm looking forward to seeing what happens because I think that there's going to be a lot of strife. There's going to be a lot of conflict that results, but I also do believe in humanity's ability to overcome this and come up with some ingenious ways to get past it, or we'll all just be, under the thumb of the Terminators the rest of our lives, one of those two, but
I think in the present, it's great. And in fairness, when I'm asking a philosophical question or a religious question or whatever, I will tell it, here are my biases or here are effectively my North Stars. Now write this in the context of someone who believes these things. I mean, so I think some of it is the onus is on us to kind of instruct and inform this AI and how it wants to seek the language and what sources it needs to look for and so on and so forth. And if it all goes to hell, it all goes to hell. I'm going to enjoy the time that I have where it's not gone to hell, for what it's worth.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's all we can do at the end of the day. Any comments, Chris or Brian, before we move on?
This question of AI, what's going to happen is interesting, right? Because we don't even quite understand what consciousness is ourselves, right? And so we talk about, can AI become sentient? Can it develop the ability to practice metacognition, to think about its thinking? Or is it just spitting out, just producing answers, right? Like, are we the one controlling it? Like, it's just, the hunting dog, right? Or whatever, right? And we're telling it essentially what to do. I tend to believe that there's something sacred about consciousness. And so I don't think that can ever be replicated. I think that's something that is inherent to what makes humanity different. And,
could that just be ego talking?
Well, of course it could be. It could always be. It could always be. To what degree does it matter? Nobody can ever answer that question, right? Nobody can ever answer that question. So you have to acknowledge that, well, it could be. And I've got a bias and we all have a bias. So I guess for me, what I'm trying to say is it's easier for me to take it on faith that, hey, it's all going to work out okay. Like whatever happens is going to be okay because we still have consciousness. And when I say okay, there might be some catastrophic things, but it's going to be okay because we maintain consciousness. So it's going to be wild. It's going to be the next 5 years even are going to be wild, but the next 50 years are going to be crazy, man. I mean, in terms of how much the world's going to change, how much it will have changed in 100 years compared to the previous, trailing 1,000 will be just exponential, just crazy.
It's I think that's something that we can't fully comprehend is the exponential.
Maybe even 2 years from now, it'll be quite a bit different, right? Like we wouldn't have had the conversation like Kyle just had, the things that he was saying 2 years ago. We would have been like, whoa, dude, in 2 years? Yeah, right. I could do that. No, it's going faster than we think.
All right. I would love to just wrap this up with rapid fire, Kyle. 3 of your favorite pearls for clinical, life, business, whatever, so let's have at it.
Man, I wrote so many things.
You did. You wrote a lot of things.
I know. I'm going to jump in categories and I can speak fast, so I'm going to do that. this is the thing I like about orthodontic pearls at your foundation is it is to seek something that you can learn in a moment that will change the next 40 years of your life or your practice. Like that's what a pearl is. It's a pearl of great price. That's the biblical idea of that. Or, there's the book, The Pearl, that you probably read, or even there was The Black Pearl. I love these books about pearls. And the idea is it is this enormously valuable, priceless even object that can really change the trajectory of one's life. And so for me, I've done orthodontics professionally for 12 years, so take it for what it's worth. But pearls for me, clinically, I love using a loops and a light, 2.5 magnification loops and a little light that, clicks onto the top of them and that's wireless and that you charge. That is a game changer for me. I think IPR does not get used nearly enough. I see a lot of finished cases where people have done no IPR and you've got very clear, black triangles. I think we have to think as, I would say, consumer, patient, whatever, is you're looking at a smile. It does not matter what you've done if there's a space that's going to trap plaque and look gross right in the very front. IPR is not that scary or it's not that hard. It's really just basic like carpentry. It's just making a good connection point between two surfaces. So it's not rocket science. So just cut the enamel away. It's fine. You need a system for it. You need practice. Yes, you can screw it up, but we're dentists originally. Like we can do this. And along those same lines, enameloplasty, anything that you see in the mouth can be reshaped to a certain extent and can be improved cosmetically and functionally. And so I think Stuart Frost for me has been a big inspiration there. Just the way that he adjusts things. And, but even talking to periodontists about, like plunger cusps and, like all these kind of things, like you can make adjustments and soften things that are too, just think about it just naturally. If thing is too sharp, it's going to bite down into something and it could cause issues. So like soften those things. I do a ton of that. And then I think, so those are detail things, micro aesthetic considerations. I think efficiency and simplicity are also massively important. And you think about like turnkey operations, like in fast food or in business or whatever, where your systems are so tight and they're so well documented and so well understood among your team that you could give someone a key and they could operate that same organization the exact same way the next day. That's a turnkey operation. And so orthodontics shouldn't be that complicated, really. And so a simple wire sequence, if you're using 4 wires on every patient, why not 3? And there's certain limitations to that. I think you need a wire that you can bend. I think you need a wire that can help with deep bites. You need a small wire that's not going to kill people, blah, blah, blah. But that is a big thing for me. And trying to seek, for me, I use a 14-eye tie into a 20/20 thermal, a reverse curve if needed, but if not, then you can go straight into a TMA, full-size TMA, like 19/20. Like that's 3 wires that can get the whole treatment done. Like do that. Don't do 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 18 wires like some of the people that taught me in school. Another thing, like just ergonomically, as you work through the clinic, think about the number of steps or the number of movements. Or I even remember like learning ergonomics in dental school, like even having to pivot the elbow as opposed to just the hand or the wrist. Like that is additional movement that you shouldn't have to make. And so why sit down? And this is like, I'm speaking Chris's gospel here because he's like Mr. Ergonomics and efficiency, but it's true. Like I love the way that Chris is. Chris is like just the perfect prime example of this, of like efficiency where possible, especially if multiplied out 100 times a day times, 365 days a year. You don't work that many, but you get the point. So I try not to sit down at the chair if I don't have to. I try not to glove up if I don't have to. I don't try to type all the notes. I've done all that and it's okay. And if you want to do that and you seek joy in those things, knock yourself out. But you should do a challenge for yourself that, for one thing, you should be training your assistants as if they are going to be orthodontists, in the sense that do not just bark orders at them, help them understand. Get them to a point of where they're paying attention, because if you can now have 4 eyes on every case as opposed to 2, that's twice as good.
Yeah.
And you don't need to sit down. You don't need to do the dog and pony show. They can do that. They can ask the questions. They can have the conversations. Of course, you can lean into those conversations as needed. You definitely don't need to type out notes. So things can be streamlined. And if you multiply that by 80, 90, 100 patients a day, it's a huge time savings. It's way more efficient. And basically the idea is don't do anything that someone else can do for you, because you'll often find that they can do it better than you can. And again, this is a question of scale. If you got one team member and it's just you, well, none of this matters. But if you've got 8, 9, 10, 16, 25 team members, you've got to put some of these systems into place. I'll try to speed up on some of the other ones for what it's worth. I hope that's helpful.
Absolutely.
TC room, let's talk that real quick. Some pearls. What is your goal of a new patient exam? Like, why does it exist? Well, I think it's twofold. I think the goal of an exam is to plan the treatment the best you can. Okay. That requires records and, diagnosis and, an in-person exam and yada, 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 and writing it out and all that kind of stuff. And then secondarily, it's to decide whether they're going to start with you or not start with you, which I think is as important. And of course, there are the financial considerations that go into it. There's a lot of other stuff, but basically, what am I going to do? And are they going to do it with me or not? That's basically why you do an exam. Do you have to go in? If you do, for how long? Do they actually have any expectation of what you do when you go into the room or not? I think these are questions that you should ask, and you should, all of us, reevaluate this entire process and this entire dance, as it were. And I think a lot of us are overcomplicating it, and we are sort of ultimately leaning on what we learned in residency, which, to be fair, was not necessarily the only way to do it and probably not the best way to do it. And so I think there are a lot of us that are getting in our own way, and we're forcing ourselves to do something that isn't necessary. All right, beyond that, sales. I think a big concept that we miss as businesses, yes, we're orthodontists. Yes, we're doing noble work, but we're also, doing work for profit. The lifetime value of a customer or a patient is a big deal. What are ways to increase this? If someone is being attracted into our office, because the traditional model of a dentist sends us a patient because we're a specialist, that's not exactly the way it works all the time now. And so I think we should view this as, there's an economy to this. It is, if a patient comes to us, now they trust us, now they started with us, what are some other things we can do to increase the lifetime value? This is how a real business would operate. And so retainer plans is one of the obvious, low-hanging fruits. And we add that in because, yes, it is a source of profit, but it also helps to eliminate one of the biggest frustration points in all of orthodontics, which is I lost my retainer. It's now $400, $500, $600?
Yeah.
Well, if you'd gotten the retainer plan, you had this insurance, it would have fixed that. So yes, a good thing. Another thing I'm exploring and we'll be talking more about next year is oral surgery and bringing those services into the orthodontic practice. Brian does pediatric dentistry. Chris has done some of that. Yes, there is synergy in that. And why not do it inside the practice to the degree that you can do it at the highest level? What about professional whitening services? What about gum tissue procedures? What about retreatments and not being embarrassed or ashamed about that? These are all ways in which someone that you attract into your office who then trusts you and develops a relationship with you can, to be frank, spend more money and get more service from you. They'll be happy to do it. We've talked a little bit about marketing. I do want to talk about real quickly, and then I have one last thing, is I had a conversation with a good friend about dental referrals and the frustration over, man, this office used to send us 50 patients a year, and I looked and they sent us 2 last year. And you can kind of get to the point where it's well, is it even worth doing any of this stuff? And I'll just say yes, no, maybe. But I do think that having a system, this is this spinning plate concept that I have with marketing in general, is that I don't know what's going to work best for you, but I know that if you put 100 good things into place and keep them spinning, something's going to work. The collective will work. And so with dental referral sources, it's something that I do, and one of them is a ChatGPT thing, is I try to stay on top of mind with all my dental referral sources. Deliveries are one of those things that we all do. We have a 2-year plan, Neon Canvas clients get a little version of it, but it's nothing earth shattering. It's basically just you take a group A and B and then you flop it the next year. And basically is to say that in most months, only group A gets gifts in this month and then group B gets gifts in the other months. They're creative in the sense that maybe we do Cinco de Mayo and not Christmas, or maybe we do Thanksgiving and not Halloween, let's say. You pick things that are going to stand out and are going to be unique, that are branded very heavily towards your practice, that get people talking, and you do them systematically. And you make sure that you're top of mind to the degree that you can control it. You're creative. And again, you're starting with why, and you're not just bringing them a tin of cookies that feel nondescript. I also use ChatGPT. Everyone who refers a patient, and whether they refer or not is immaterial to me. If they're connected with a dentist, I every 2 weeks get a list of all those doctors and I text them personally. So it's taken a while to develop this list of doctor numbers in my phone. But now I'll take that list and it has the associated patients that they sent or didn't send, but they're connected to them. And I'll tell ChatGPT, I want to do a short text message thanking this doctor for this patient by name and inviting them to reach out if they have any questions or concerns, or say some like topical thing about this thing that happened or whatever, like, oh, it's sure cold, isn't it? Like, and it can like do that, and you can copy and paste and send that as text to all these people. Like what used to take me an hour, which is not that long, now it takes me 10 minutes. But it is about now connecting, and 20% of those don't say anything. Another 40% maybe give it a thumbs up. Maybe the remainder will say something, like, oh, thank you, we love your office or whatever. Or, hey, 5%, 10% might say, hey, actually that patient, I want to talk to you about that. And now it stimulates a conversation and it elevates you among, the other specialists in your area. And then we do an annual CE event. So we kind of kiss babies and things, but I don't like doing lunches. I don't like, going to someone's office and having to do a sample size of one, expenditure of energy and time and thought. I like to do things that are sort of more shotgun approach. And so, the most direct and personal I get is text messages that I send out that ChatGPT helped me write.
I like
because
that.
it's more efficient. Okay, do we have time for one more Pearl?
Sure do.
Let's go for it.
Andy's like, I don't know.
This is so good. I'm like, yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Chris.
I'm getting kind of bored. I don't know about the rest of you. But I'll just suck it up.
That's fine. Andy, just stick with it. Andy has fallen asleep, actually. He's turned off his computer monitor. He's just sleeping over there.
I just have an AI responding to everything at this point.
So my last thing would be this, like with all the things that we talk about, and we've talked about a lot today about, what practice we're shooting for and how to be effective at marketing, or what's AI going to do, or, all those sorts of things. Like those are all very interesting. But at the end of the day, like I think the most important thing is the seeking of joy, the seeking of balance, the seeking of peace, the seeking of fulfillment in one's life, however you want to communicate that or say that. We know what I'm getting at, right?
Yes.
You want to feel, kind of deep breath in, deep breath out, and feel good. And so I think, as life pearls go, as you kind of ask for pearls on things, I always have to talk about life, mental health, happiness, joy, like those things. And I think it is a seeking of balance in the Bible, but also in all religion. Effectively, it talks about maybe the 4 different aspects of one, and that would be heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I think that's kind of a good way to think about what we're seeking as a complete person. And I think a person that has a soul and has a consciousness, and however you want to parse that out. But life is about balance. We have to nurture these 4 aspects of oneself at all times to the degree that it can be even better. We should, from the heart perspective, we should love deeply. We should forgive often. And that keeps our heart light and not burdened. From a spiritual standpoint, which I think is probably the most commonly ignored aspect of one's person, is we should feed our soul with what connects us to God. And if it's not God in your kind of, worldview, it is Mother Nature, or it is the energy that connects us all, or whatever you want to say. But this grounds us in purpose, and that's important. And I think that often gets overlooked. The mind, I think, maybe among orthodontists, this is ignored, but I think among the general populace, this gets ignored a lot, is we should continue to challenge our minds. We should continue to try to learn and to grow. We should stay curious. And I think importantly, we should stay open, in the sense that we should not assume that we know everything or that we're always right. I think that's a sign of weakness, and to be fair, low intelligence. And then lastly, the one I probably ignore the most is the strength, and the heart, soul, mind, and strength that is taking care of your body, sleeping, eating well, exercising. And then importantly, what's the benefit of having strength, as it were, energy, if you're not using it for others? And so, you can use it for yourself, because we're so big on looking internally and focusing on ourselves and idolizing ourselves. That's increasingly a focus, but we should be using.
He's talking about you, Brian.
Although he can bench me, Brian's a very loving and outwardly focused person, but we should be accumulating this strength and this time and this energy to give it to other people and to serve others. And then that will come back to us. And so I would say in all that, like as a perfectionist and a recovering perfectionist, if you want to say, balance in these areas does not mean perfection in every area all at once, but it means listening to what needs attention. And our bodies will tell us that, or our minds will tell us that, or our relationships will tell us that, and giving energy to those things when they need it and trying to keep that in balance the best we can. And I think it always, being gracious and giving grace and mercy to those along the way. Because I think that the core tenet of Christianity is that we have been offered a grace, a gift that we didn't deserve. And I think because of that, we owe that to others. So that would be my random collection of life.
So good, Kyle. So good.
Great,
advice.
Yeah, thank you.
That I'm still working on and I'm entirely imperfect at.
Well, that's the great thing, though. That's the great thing, because it isn't perfection, right? It's just striving honestly and sincerely.
Well, we really appreciate you sharing all that with us, Kyle. Thank you for your time today. I think this has been illuminating for all of us. If you liked what you hear today, we would really appreciate it if you subscribe, like our podcast, maybe even leave us a review. We would greatly appreciate that. And we look forward to seeing you all at the Mother of Pearls conference. When is that again, Chris?
October 10th through 12th at the Kennedy Space Center.
Love it. All right. Well, thanks again, Kyle. Always a pleasure. And that will be us signing off.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thanks, Kyle.
If you're an orthodontist that wants to connect with over 500 colleagues, hear over 30 of the best speakers in orthodontics, and see 50 of the most cutting-edge exhibits, have a chance to win some of over $70,000 worth of prizes, including a trip to Kauai, and enjoy the absolute best parties in orthodontics, you won't want to miss the 7th annual MOPC, the Mother of Pearls Conference, coming this October 9th through 11th. We're going big for our 7th year by renting out the Astronaut Memorial Foundation at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. This is the hub for NASA, where they train more astronauts than anywhere else in the world, and SpaceX launches occur all the time. We toured the campus, and let me tell you, it's like the Disney World of space, with theme park attractions, actual space shuttles, interactive exhibits, and real astronauts. On top of the best speakers, we'll be having our world-famous Friday Night Pearls party under the Saturn Apollo 5 rocket, with dinner, drinks, space-themed activities, and live music from the world's only all-orthodontist band, RELAPSE. Early bird prices are about to go up for every 100 tickets sold and have already gone up twice. Be sure to register today with your team at orthodonticpearls.org to get the best price for the best conference in orthodontics. Plus, we are the only conference with worry-free registration. If anything comes up and you can't make it for any reason, you can transfer your registration to next year's conference absolutely free. It's a no-brainer, so be sure to lock in your best price by registering you and your team for the best conference in orthodontics, the Mother of Pearls Conference, at orthodonticpearls.org today.